Greetings. Welcome to Epicor Eclipse ERP, somewhat laughably named Auto Price Update Process. Eclipse provides several tools to allow you to update the distributor net price or your costs for your individual product items. You can either go in product maintenance, go into an individual record one at a time, and change the pricing in that, which is slow and unwieldy and should not be done in large amounts. You have something called the price sheet entry tool, and this is good for a small subset of a product line, a dozen or so products or so, like EMT or something like that. And it's usually arranged in something called discount groups, and you can use that mechanism. If you've got a large number of records, like an entire line like Leviton that might have 5,000 SKUs in it, then the auto price update tool is the ideal mechanism for that. Because if you had to do it one at a time or in the price sheet, you'd be there a very, very long time. There is another tool that Eclipse also provides. It's called a product data warehouse. And this is an add-on product. Typically costs about $5,000 or so. And the PDW is designed for maintaining very, very large number of records. It usually is connected in with one of your catalog services like Trade Service or IDEA IDW or Unilog, where you're getting a regular feed from them and then is pulled in and squeezed through PDW, which is a whole separate database table, or what they call a file in Eclipse anyway. And you can use that to synchronize and do mass changes to entire sections of your product file. PDW is very powerful, but it is, as I said, it's an add-on expense. A lot of Eclipse users don't have it, and it is a bear to set up. And I'm not entirely sure that of the utility of it as well, because unfortunately PDW is its biggest Achilles heel is how well the data is maintained from the catalog services. And my experience with IDEA IDW and Unilog is they're god-awful. Their data is extremely inconsistent. Trade Service is probably the better of the batch, but even Trade Service has got its own little issues. But anyway, so those are the distributor net price updating tools that you have available. Now we're going to concentrate on the one at hand here, the auto price update tool. Now, this tool can be used for adding new products into your product file, but that's a presentation for another time. We're just going to deal with the very basics of doing simple net price changes in your product file. Now, in order for this tool to work, it's dependent on UPC codes. It has to have 11-digit UPC codes in the imported file in order for it to do its matchup and price changes. Quite often, you have certain vendors, especially if you do a lot of lighting. Most Chinese lighting vendors change their lines so often that they don't even bother with UPC codes, and so you're not going to be able to use the tool on them, not without doing an awful lot of interesting back-end stuff, which I can talk about at some other time. So this would be mainly your mainline vendors like Rayco and Leviton and Sylvania, Philips and Satco and things like that. Companies that you'd normally find in a pricing service like Trade Service. I would like to say at this point that vendors, in my opinion, are buggers. The little devils are always doing devious little shit things to make your life a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Typically, at least in my experience, it is like pulling teeth from a chicken to try and get updated pricing spreadsheets from your vendors or from your reps. And when you do get them, every blasted vendor and rep has a different spreadsheet format. Oftentimes they'll change the format from month to month, Each one is different from each other. Usually parts of the data that you need is not even there, and the data that is in the spreadsheet is usually in a format that you can't even use it easily. So the biggest problem with the auto price update process is the amount of whittling down you have to do from your vendor information spreadsheets till you get it into a format that's usable to actually use the tool on it. Anyway, so I've said that, so rehash, vendors are bastards. Now, having said that, here's an example spreadsheet of a typical vendor. Here's Orbit Industries. And this is what their standard pricing update spreadsheet looks like. And don't bother, these net prices are not right. I've altered them, of course. And there's several processing steps we have to do before we get this in a format that we can make use of. So let's begin. So the first thing that we're going to do with our example spreadsheet is remove all the garbage header information that was on it that we don't need for the Eclipse update. So I don't really care about their little inserted logos or the name of the rep or any of that stuff, so I yank all that stuff out. And then also remove the obviously unnecessary at this point in the game columns of information. I don't care what their pricing group is, I don't care what their discount rate is, etc., etc. And so we start to see at this step something that looks like this. I've noticed over the years that vendors just love to put record information in there that is unusable. They'll come up with an item that has no catalog number, or in this case we see here that there's a record in there that has no UPC code. Well, that's completely useless for me to update, and odds are I don't even carry the damn thing. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sort your spreadsheet by whatever UPC column there currently is and look for records that have got missing UPC codes and just delete those darn things out. So after we've cleaned out the obvious garbage, then the next thing we need to do is go ahead and reformat the UPCs in most cases. Most vendors that I've seen, they love to put spaces, dashes, slashes, or all kinds of weird garbage in there, or sometimes they'll even go as far as split the UPC code in two and put it in two separate columns. As I said, they're buggers, and I think they do this shit on purpose. Anyway, so now you're going to take whatever format the UPC codes are in and clean it down till you get a nice standard 11-digit long UPC code. And you're going to do some reformatting. The UPC code, when you get it in this final format, you want it to be the first column in this worksheet, and you want it to be formatted as text, and you don't want it as formulas, you want it as actual values. Over here on the right side, you'll see some standard Excel formulas that can be used to slice and dice and mangle the UPC code down into the proper format. Quite often you just need to take some spaces and dashes out, and quite often they'll use a 12-digit UPC code, which is the standard. A 12-digit UPC code is just the 11-digit UPC code with a checksum number on the end. So you put in a little formula there to chop off that checksum number because you don't need it. Eclipse can't use it at this point in the game anyway. Quite often, a lot of the UPC codes start with zeros or a couple of zeros. And you would think, well, a couple of zeros missing on the front won't make any difference. Eclipse, the price update tool, will not match the darn things if the zeros are missing from the front. So quite often while you're processing, you're going to have to pad and put the zeros back in, and as I said, convert that column to text. So there's also a formula here that I'm referencing that shows how to pad the zeros back on the front of the UPC code as it needs it and trim out the spaces. Anyway, so there's quite some convoluted steps to try and get that UPC code in a format where you can match it up in Eclipse. But if you don't do it, nothing after this will work. So once we finally wrangled the UPC code back into the proper format, now we can work on the next bit here, and that is to try and identify and modify the unit of measure field. If some vendors will not give you a unit of measure, they'll give you quantity, 1, 100, 1000. Some do give you the unit of measure but don't give you the quantity. More often than not, they're inconsistent in the unit of measure, and you have to do some heavy modifications to it before you can make it work right. And so you sort by unit of measure and then change whatever formats they've done into a consistent format. So E goes away and it becomes EA for each, at least in my system, the way I have mine set. If they've done weird things for 100, that becomes C. These should be capital letters, but they don't have to be. 1000 should be M. Foots, bags, stuff like that, you have to get creative and figure out, well, per foot is each. Bag is usually 1, so that's each, that type of thing. And so you sort it all down, and everything should be EA, C, or M, unless your system's programmed different, and then whatever unit of measure labels you've used in your system apply. Now, why is this part necessary? Well, vendors, once again, being the little devils that they are, quite often when you set up your product file, the price per unit of measure that you've used, which probably came from a catalog service or some spreadsheet from the vendor, it may or may not match the spreadsheet that you have before you now. I have seen vendors that love to switcheroo, and I've got product files that have pricing per unit of measure of each, and every time we get quotes they give us price per unit of measure of each, and yet every quarter or so when I get an updated spreadsheet for them, all the prices are in per 100. You can obviously see here if your unit of measures don't match, and instead of being $1 each, it's $100 per 100, but the unit of measure is wrong and you just made it $100 each. You've now fouled up everything, and if you do that to 5,000 records, you'll hate life and you'll want to strangle your vendor, which in my opinion probably needs to be done anyway. But anyway, so this unit of measure field is needed by the processor to be able to figure out whether it's seeing a price per each and match it to your product record, and see if that's a price per each or a price per 100, and it will recalculate, it'll readjust the price to match whatever price per unit of measure you've got in your product file. That's why it's so very, very important that this unit of measure field gets set up correctly and is in place. Once you've got those bits done, then you do the final formatting changes and column deletions and rearrangings. And here you have what you started with before, and at least for the purposes of our example, what the information should look like after you've taken out all the stuff that's not necessary and standardized and rationalized the data. Now in our example here, we're just going to be changing our purchasing cost and our calculated cost, and I use different terminology in my system than you might have in yours. I don't know what you're naming purchase cost, and calculated cost is also commission cost. It can be several different ways. Anyway, those are the two different costs that I'm going to be pulling, and for the sake of this representation I'm just using one column. I'm using the same net price to populate both of those fields in the product file. It is not uncommon to have different purchasing and commission cost numbers, and ideally you'd have two different columns in your final spreadsheet and you'd pull from those. So once you've got your data all cleaned, now you can go ahead and export it to a MS-DOS CSV file, and when you've got that done, open up the file in Notepad and remove the header field if it's in there, and do a quick once-over check of the data. The thing that you're probably going to want to look at most, the thing that usually causes you the biggest glitching, is that you might have had incorrect formatting either on the UPC code field, and instead of getting nice clean 11-digit UPC codes, you've got God knows what. And on the formatting of the column that had your pricing information, you want to make sure that it wasn't formatted in some form of currency and it's put commas in there, because since this is a comma separated value file, If it has additional commas in the price, now it's fouled up the whole formatting, and the process is just going to be a nightmare mess. You're just going to mangle your products. So check for those things, and once you're fairly sure that it looks the way you expect it to, now you can take it to the next step. Now, of course, you probably guessed it. As a general rule, if it's anything important that needs to be done, it can't be done in Solar. So you've got to go back to the old eTerm interface to do this process. You're going to go into your Spooler control and Alt-U to upload, and search on your local drive for the CSV file that you've created and checked and cleaned up, and select that to put in. The system will prompt you for a Spooler title, and this is the name the data set is going to be when it's uploaded into Eclipse, so it's for its own internal reference. You can name it just about anything, but probably want something that makes some sense. And here's what it looks like when the file is uploaded correctly. Now keep in mind, we haven't changed anything yet. This is just uploading the data set into a holding section of the Universe database so that the processor program can do the next step. So don't panic, nothing's changed yet. Always a good idea at this point to do an AltV View and take a look at the data as it looks now in the hold area of Eclipse, just as a one last once-over to make sure that your data was cleaned and formatted the way you expected it to be, and it looks right there. Yeah, you're not going to catch little niggling errors. You're just looking for glaring stuff that you may have fouled up the formatting. And if that's the case, you just go back to your spreadsheet, clean it up, do the export process again, and upload it again. No harm, no foul. Once you feel comfortable with the data set, then do a Alt-R to process. Make sure that Auto Product Price Updating is selected as the processing type, and do an Alt-B to begin the process. Now, in order for this price update processor program to do its magic, it has to have a translation table. That is a way of mapping the different columns of data in the data file to the right fields in the product file records that need to be updated. So that's what this little dude here does, and hopefully at some point when your system was installed, at least some example templates, if not templates for every one of your price lines, and you do have to have a template for every one of your price lines, has been created with this basic information. If they don't exist, and you just hit F10 to see if there's any there, then you'll have to create some. They're simple to do. There's not a whole lot to it, and they're pretty consistent. For work ID, typically you name it whatever your price or buy lines are on your system, and then we'll go to the next steps. So the very next step in the creation of this template is to Alt-R for record layout and to tell it what format the imported data file is in. In this case, since we're dealing with CSV, here are the parameters for a CSV file. A record type of variable, meaning variable width, as CSV files are, as instead of fixed width, and the delimiter character is, of course, a comma. Next thing to enter in is the unit of measure translation table with Alt-U, and this is, well, enter it as you see here. Enter is shown unit of measure for import files. Since it's case sensitive, you're going to have the uppercase and lowercase version just in case you goofed and in your imported file you did it in lowercase. Now what this is going to do is it's going to, for each record, it's going to look at that unit of measure entry, and as we said back when we were modifying the spreadsheet, we only wanted EAs, Cs, and Ms, or whatever unit of measures are appropriate in your system, just specifically to make it easier for us on creating this unit of measure translation table. And so what this is going to do is, as the processor goes through, it's going to check the unit of measure, price per unit of measure on the data that's coming in. It's going to take a look at the product file record and take a look at the price per unit of measure there. And if it sees a difference, it's going to use whatever number that you put in the translation table to multiply or divide that price so it matches the price per unit of measure in your product file record. So extremely important, has to be done. The next thing to do in creating the translation template is we need to map the columns of data that are in the imported file to the fields that correspond in the product file in the records. Now, as we see here, here's our example spreadsheet. We see that column A, which is our UPC code, is element 1, and element 1 shows up in the price update number and the UPC number entries, which it has to do or else nothing else will work. Then the price bases are kind of a neutral bucket. At this point, you don't care what price you're putting in the bucket. You're just assigning a column that's a price to a basis. In this case, column B, which is going to be our net price, we assign to price basis number 1, and the other ones aren't necessary at this point. And the unit of measure, which is column C in our spreadsheet, is obviously element 3, and that goes in pricing unit of measure. Once you have the template all finished, then you want to do an Alt-S to scan, and this will allow you to review the records that are going to be affected by this price update. It's going to do a check, it's going to match the UPC codes, and it's going to give you a number of records. Odds are if you end up with an item count of 0, that means you've mapped something wrong, or your UPC entries are wrong and don't match the UPC codes that are in your system. So you screwed something up, and go back to your original spreadsheet and figure out where you went wrong. If you do have an item count, then you're that much farther along. Now, ideally, when you do a scan, you should be able to see this. You should only see a single price line that is listed, because you don't want to have a spreadsheet where you're updating a mix of parts that are in several price lines, because it gets ugly with the processor. It can do it, but you have to bounce back and forth, and it gets irritating. But it's still, it's quite possible that some records are a little scrambled and they're in the wrong price line for some whatever reason, so you might see multiple price line entries, and it's not a big deal. You can Alt-V when you highlight a particular price line, and you can see the individual records that make up that, in this case, item count of 24, and it'll show you the record ID, the Eclipse record ID number under PN. Why they call it PN, I don't know. And you can use product maintenance, the Alt-P there, to get right into the records. So you can look around a fair bit and make sure that everything looks right before you go on to the next step. The next bit is to do Alt-F to edit formulas, and the price sheet entry formula is this is how you're mapping the imported data to, and the price bases that you've selected. Remember, there were 5 of them, 1 through 5, and you're telling it which price bases you want to map to what actual prices in your product file records. And so you're selecting whether you want to update them, and if there's any special adjusting formula that you want to add to adjust the price up or down or whichever, depending on your circumstances. So here we're taking whatever price bases we have set, and we're mapping them to the basis names of the prices in the product file that we want to change. In CalcBase, for price basis that we want to change, you change it from no update to auto. There's a formula entry there that if you want to tweak it a little bit, as we said when I started out, I'm using one price entry field to change 2 price bases in the system. If I wanted to use that number as a basis, but say I wanted calc to be a little bit higher than perch, I could put in a formula there, so it'll take that number, raise it up a little bit, and put the adjustment in. I would not suggest doing this unless you have to. I find it much better to do the formulas and adjustments and have it as a separate column and a different basis name imported from the spreadsheet than to do calculations here, but you certainly have that ability to do so. So all this weird ugliness that you're seeing here is really quite simple. As you can see, we had column 2 was the net price in the spreadsheet that we imported. We mapped column 2, as you can see down here in the lower, to price basis number 1. Then we go here in the price sheet entry and we tell it automatically change according to the information in the imported file, the purchase cost basis name and the calc cost basis name. And these basis names are coming from your price line maintenance. So check price line maintenance or look in your product file record and you'll get an idea of what your basis names are, because yours are going to be different. And I'm doing a calculation of whatever number that is in the imported file times 1, obviously. Now you may have noticed in the original data, vendors love to do this crazy shit where they give you 4-digit pricing. Why on earth I need to know that it's 4 1/1000ths of a penny for each for a price? I have no idea. They're insane that way, but sometimes they do it. Not a big problem though. As we can see here, according to this formula, it's going to take whatever that price is. It sees 4, it's going to round it to 3. So Eclipse typically does 3-digit pricing to 1/100th of a cent. Also seems insane to me. Anyway, so that's how that's read. It looks ugly at first. It's really simple. After you've got all your formulas updated, now you go in and you change your new effective date to whatever effective date that you want these prices to take effect for this price line. If this list shows multiple price lines, you have to change the formula for each price line and you have to put in the new effective date for each price line. And you have to do it in that order. If you try and put in the new effective date first and then you change the formula, you'll find out it doesn't change the effective date. That's an interesting glitch in their processor. So you got to change the formula, then after you change all the formulas, change the effective dates, and then you're in good shape. At this point, we've done all the template adjustments, tweaks, formulas, mapping, and effective dates, things that we need to do. Now we can actually run the process. So, of course, you'll escape, and then Alt-B to begin the process. Occasionally, if you've made template changes, it might bark at you. Do you want to save the changes to your translation template that you've done? And of course, yes, you do. And then you Alt-B and begin the process. After you select Begin, you're going to be prompted as to whether or not you want to create a hold file for ignored items. The answer is always going to be no. This comes into play because, as I said, this tool can also be used for adding new products. So this is one of those mechanisms that may go along with that. And no, we don't need it, so no. So we hit Escape, and this is your last step before changes actually are made. If you've fouled something up or you're not sure at this point, you can hit F12 and cancel the process and go back and recheck things if you're concerned that you might not have had something right. Otherwise, you do C to continue, and it'll run off on the process. It does have a edit product function. You could go in one at a time and check the changes. That's obviously ugly. If this is supposed to be automatic and fast, doing edit product would be a bad way to go. So C and enter. If you don't blink, you might see this screen. It moves very, very fast, but it does. If you had a very large record set and a very slow server, you might actually have a chance to halt the process before it went all the way through. I've never been able to because I can't move my fingers in sub-millisecond time. But anyway, when the processor is done, it's just going to pop you back to the user-defined auto price updating, the translation template. Why? I don't know. Ask the programmer. And you'll hit Escape to go back to the spooler. And now, although you probably figured out at this point that the process was complete, now they decide to pop up a window to tell you the process was complete. There are a few reports that may get created in this process depending on the contents of your imported data file and some of the selections that you have in the template. The automatic price updates report is the one that you see most commonly. Ignored items you might see more of if there were some items that were in your data file that there weren't product file records for, and we told it not to create product records if they were missing. Looking inside the ignored items report, we see there's nothing, so hey, that's good. I don't know why it decided to create a report, but just to tell me there's nothing in it. The auto price update report, you're going to want to download your local PC to view because it's large and the columns kind of, I think they're 132 columns, so they scroll off the screen. So not good to try and read through on the viewer. So go ahead and do the Alt-L download process. And usually I'm just doing an eyeball check, so I'm not usually going to bring it into a spreadsheet, and the formatting is ugly anyway. So I just export it as a text file just to read through it. So here is an excerpt of our auto price update report, and for each price basis that we've changed in a record, it's going to show you a different line for each price basis. I guess that makes some sense. That doesn't matter. It's going to show you what the previous price was, it's going to show you what you updated the price to, and it's going to show you what it considers a difference percentage. And if you see any large swings, you might want to check the unit of price per unit of measure in your source file or something in your product record that might not be quite right. Usually, seeing percentage differences of 10, even 20, 30% is not that unusual, but if you're starting to see 900% or minus 99% or so, odds are you got a cost that either is formatted wrong or you've got a unit of measure issue that needs to be straightened out. If you go into product price maintenance and pull up one of the records that you expect to have changed and do Alt-P, Alt-P for product price sheet maintenance, there you'll see added to the price sheet our updated pricing, and all well and good. So that gives you some positive confirmation that what happened. Oftentimes you'll do a price update and you'll see on the report that for the most part everything was good, but you might just have a couple of straggler records where something was quirky. Rather than trying to clean things up and go through that whole process all over again just to fix a couple of records, it's easier just to go into the product price maintenance and make whatever tweaks you need to the couple that are fouled up. So do it this way rather than go through the whole process again. Unless, of course, you're a sadomasochist, and then by all means have fun. As I've mentioned briefly a couple of times, this tool can also be used to create new product records for products that don't currently exist in your product file. It has limitations and a little tricky. You can't get all of the information in there. There's some changes you have to still go back into the record and change. So it's between the limitations and complications, it's more than we want to cover in this presentation. So we may do this in another one if I'm feeling gutsy and I have a couple of days to kill. And this completes our presentation on the basic rudimentary use of the automatic price update process that's in your Eclipse system. I don't know if you found this presentation entertaining, but hopefully it was at least informational. Thank you for your attention, and as always, I am not Scott Zahn.